As a guitarist who loves to solo, I've always been really intrigued by the way tempo affects how you phrase your licks. You know, whether it's fast, medium, or slow, and also the feel, whether it's straight eights, even eights, or like a swing eights feel, or like a heavy funk thing with a backbeat, 16th note pulse. And it's interesting, you know, when you play at a slower tempo, you have so many more options, you know, and a lot of it has to do with the limitations of your technique, you know, unless you have superhero Al Di Meola chops, which I certainly don't, you know, you're kind of limited. If you're playing at a really fast tempo, a lot of times all you can really do is manage to play is eighth notes, you know, whether it's like a fast jazz swing or like a thrash metal thing. But when you play at a slower tempo, say anything below 120 beats for me, that's where I can comfortably play 16th notes. I remember back, reminiscing here, back when I was in jazz college, a fellow cadet and I would sit after all classes in the day, we'd sit around and just jam on what we called real book songs in the real book was a fake book. And I'd count off a song, I'd go 1, 2. He's like, no, dude, slow down, you know, just like right here, 1, 2. Do it at the guitar, quote, guitar tempo. And I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. And he made a point that, you know, when you play at a slower tempo like that, you get more time to think, literally think between beats. And, you know, especially if you're spontaneously improvising, right? And you get more time to think about what you're going to play and craft your lines and also play some double time phrases. And then you try to acquire that muscle memory, you know, and that relaxed feeling, and then just try to replicate that at faster tempos gradually. You know, you work with a metronome, drum machine, and whatnot. So what I'd like to do in this lesson is continue on the 1/4 Dorian vamp we covered in the last lesson. This time we're going to switch it to the key of E minor and show you like a little solo I came up with, the first part of it. This one is really, it's all like bending and like slow wailing, bending and vibrato, but with some like slippery little pull off and slide type of things. Things that I wouldn't be able to do at a faster tempo. It's inspired by the classic Pink Floyd song Breathe, you know, Breathe in the Air from Dark Side of the Moon. And also it's the same kind of progression that Stevie Ray Vaughan used in the song Riviera Paradise, the instrumental. And it goes E minor 7 to A7. It's a slow kind of a jam. So let me show you the chord progression, which is basically a vamp, 1 chord per bar. And then I'll play the solo, and then I'll break it down for you. So we're in the key of E minor, and the chords are E minor 7, like that, and to A7. And the groove is like this. It's around 60 beats per minute. Nice and easy, laid back. Okay, so that's basically it. In Breathe, by the way, Gilmour, I think he plays this minor add 9. It's more of a straight type of haunting sound to A7. And Riviera Paradise, I think keyboardist Reese Winans plays E minor 9 to A13. Definitely a more decidedly jazzier tone. But I'm just going to stick with the E minor 7 to A7. And I'm going to lay that down as a backing track and then play the solo over it. So here's the solo. Okay, as I may have mentioned earlier, what I'm kind of going for here is I'm emulating David Gilmour's dreamy, ethereal lap steel parts that he overdubbed on Breathe. You know, he had reverb drenched, just big long things, you know, with the bar. So I'm emulating that using string bends, and I'm pretty much raking into every bend, you know, to give it a dramatic attack. So When you do that, you have to make sure you mute the strings. Like the first bend, I'm going. I'm not just doing that, I'm going. So I have to I'm doing that, but I have to make sure that those strings don't ring, because that'll ruin it, right? So hold it for a second and then add the vibrato, like a pro singer would. And I'm also kind of forming a little bridge. This is something you do with some right hand muting. I'm doing the rake, palm muting the bass strings, but then once I bend that note, I'm kind of checking the adjacent strings. I'm muting the B and the D string so they don't accidentally ring. That turbulence that happens when you shake the string, sometimes it can cause the neighboring strings to ring. So it's very important to, okay, middle finger supported by the index finger. It's very challenging to bend at the second fret. I mean, first fret, forget it, you're not gonna do it, but second fret you can bend on the top 3 strings, but you just gotta really support it, and it's tight down there, but it sounds really twangy, and this is where you get the most sustain. The strings ring the most. So I love these low position bends, So you got. Okay, and that's bending up to a chord tone of E minor 7. Bending up to the 5th. And then when it goes to A, I'm going. Same thing, I'm raking into it. Whole step bend, and then a pre-bend, basically re-articulating it. Waiting a second, and then shaking it out. Again, I'm kind of forming a little bridge here, muting the adjacent strings. And then another rake. So each time, notice how I'm kind of climbing. I went from then to going up to the 3rd of A7, C sharp, and now I'm going, and then bending from C sharp on the 2nd fret of the B string up to D, but I'm doing it as a pre-bend. Half step. Shaking that out, and you do that by kind of partially releasing it. Okay, that's at the end of bar 3. I do another rake, a half step bend, release, pull off, and then hammer onto 3 without picking it again, and then bend that up a whole step using the ring finger supported by the middle. Again, always reinforced fingering. The concept, I'm thinking Van Halen, that real slinky thing. It's a little trickier for me. I play with 10s and standard tuning. Eddie plays with 9s. Down a half step, which makes it significantly slinkier and easier to do that. But I like the tone of 10s, and standard tuning is just more universal for playing, in bands and whatnot. Again, shaking it out, bending it up to pitch. Okay, that's going into bar 5. Another rake across the muted D and G strings. Bend up a whole step, release, bend up again, give it a second, then shake it, just like a good singer would. That's kind of neat. I'm using similar phrasing with each 2-bar phrase, but I'm kind of trying to vary it a little bit. That's cool. I love half-step bends. It's so much easier to get a relaxed sounding bend vibrato. So I'm bending at the 5th fret, release, pull off, and then hammer on, bend, pull off, and then hammer on a 4th fret, and then only bending that up a half step from D sharp to E. That would be the 5th of A. This is in bar 6. And then a little finger slide at the end of bar 6. Bar 7, another half step pre-bend. Really obviously influenced by David Gilmour here. I'm thinking like the way he played on Comfortably Numb and Time and all these wailing solos. This half step bends requires muscle memory and auditory memory. You're gonna try to hit that. I'm going for this note, G, but I'm actually playing off F sharp, so you got to remember how much force. You don't want to overshoot it. If I overshoot it and play a whole step bend, it's going to sound terrible. If I go, the major third is going to sound terrible over a minor chord. You know, unless you're Miles Davis, I don't know who else can make that work. End of bar 7. Okay, going up, notice I'm kind of climbing here. That goes into the A7 chord in bar 8. So I'm doing a half step bend and release at the 7th fret with a pull off. Hammer back on without picking again and do the same thing again. And I'm doing it 3 times. And then kind of catching that at the 8th fret, doing a whole step bend from G up to A. Shaking it out. So end of bar 7. 1, 2, 3. Okay, then a nice long slide. I'm going. Middle finger, big long slide. I have 5th fret to 9th fret. Doesn't really matter. It's just kind of an indeterminate. You just kind of, you're going sliding into the 9th fret note. And then a half step bend, pull off. And then a whole step bend from 10th fret A, which is the 4th of E minor, up to the 5th. That's a typical pentatonic bend, right? You go from the 4th, bend up to the 5th. Hold it for a second, then shake it out. And when I say shake it out, I mean partially release it and rebend it. So you're bending up a whole step, from A to B. But then to vibrato, you're only going like, not even that, like less than a half step. Kind of dipping below the note. That's how you get like the real vocal-like sound. And this is cool. Now I'm gonna, while holding that, I'm gonna catch the 10th fret D note with my pinky. Real like, you know, kind of country, southern rock. Okay, so at bar 9. Again, I'm going for a real legato type of sound, trying to pick only when necessary. You know, trying to emulate the sound of a whammy bar, which I obviously don't have, but I love that slinkiness, you know, that Stevie Ray Van Halen, noodly, you know, drunken kung fu, Captain Jack Sparrow, like all, you know. So I'm doing a regular vibrato on the 10th fret. Little curl there on the 8. And then jump up to the 12 position box. You know, again, using register, start out low, go up high, you're telling a story, building a solo. That's the king of all bends, my favorite one, right? B string, 15th fret. Again, a rake, muting the strings with the first 2 fingers, and then, and also with the palm, the right hand, right? And using reinforced fingering, bending the D note up to E with the ring finger, supported by the middle, 1 fret behind, and then release and pull off, and then pre-bend. That's a good exercise, right? Just being able to, you know, not go, or you want to go, can't undershoot it or overshoot it. That requires practice to acquire the muscle memory and the auditory memory for your brain to tell your fingers just how much pressure to apply. Okay, and then halfway through bar 11, again, going for that slinky Van Halen type of vibe. Bend, release, pull off, hammer back on, release, pull off, hammer. Again, rinse, repeat. And then the hammer onto the 3rd fret, which is a sour note, right? I mean, I'm playing A7, but I'm playing the minor 3rd, but it's okay because I'm quickly bending up to the major 3rd. So that's the major 3rd of A, and then catching the E note at the 15th fret, the high E string. That's, you know, it creates that A7 type of sound, except for instead of going, just playing a regular unbent C sharp in G, I'm going. It has like that kind of cool country pedal steel sound. So, and shake that, and then at the end of this bar 12, real straight up blues rock, you know, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Our King. Put a fierce vibrato, not a bend vibrato, just a regular vibrato on the root note E, the 17th fret of the B string. And that's where we'll continue with the rest of the solo. Next time, in the next lesson, I'll show you how I start to get more busy rhythmically. But here you can see that I have options. You know, I'm throwing in little like spurts of 30-second notes and stuff, but mostly just kind of like using these big, long whole notes and just shakes, vibratos. And it's just fun to be able to have all that space to express yourself rhythmically, and you know, not be limited by your technique to just playing, you know, eighth notes or eighth note triplets or whatever you can keep up with.